Hello and welcome to the third of our sessions of doctoral. My name is Neil Leach. I'm one of the initiators of the Digital Futures project, and I'm here today with Philip Yuan and our team of support team. And we have 4 presentations today. I'm going to be handing over to Gustavo Rincon, who will be chairing the session. I should also say that we have Marissa Bell Marat from Georgia Tech also for feedback. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. So today we're going to have some really great presentations. So I would say right now we're going to start with Sara, but before then, I'm going to introduce briefly, we have Sara Codarin, PhD from the University de Ferrara, Diego Pinochet, I guess, from MIT, and Xi Zhong Ming from the ETH in Zurich, and then Marina Rodriguez das Neves from DDES FIU. So we will start with Sara Codarin, PhD, University de Ferrara. The title that she will present today is Robotic Manufacturing for the Conservation of Cultural Heritage. Take it away.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen. You guys see everything all right? So thanks again for having me presenting today. I'm Sara Codarin. I'm based in Italy, currently teaching remotely at Lawrence Technological University. And today I'm talking about digital workflows in architecture. My dissertation follows a structure that I visualized as a funnel that shows my process of narrowing my knowledge through my research toward an experiment that I use as a proof of concept. And then I'm using my first-hand experimentation as an opportunity to expand the discussion and the speculation on the results, covering multiple sectors. So I'm interested in robotics for customized construction with applications in conservation. And my research topic is framed within the context of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. You all know that it's a social technical change. It comes from manufacturing, and it opens and explores possibilities for design at all scales through new tools for production that create an interesting and direct relationship between the virtual and the physical world. But despite the opportunities given by the current advanced framework, the rapid technological development in general is not always followed by the same rate of acceptance. So if you look at Martex and Moore's laws, we notice, like, pairing them together, we see that technologies change and advance exponentially, while organizations change at a logarithmic rate, which means much slower. And if it's hard for the construction industry to accept change, which is not technologically driven, especially for implementation, it's even harder for the conservation sector because restoration traditions, and the main reason is because restoration is linked to craft people that work on site and that interrupt the digital continuum in the realization of projects. And so, like, looking at conservation or restoration, to me, was relevant to look at the structure of the building site because, well, construction is a conservative sector for many reasons. There's a lack of an advanced infrastructure, but also it can be described as a temporary coalition of people that create sort of experimental products, that create prototypes. And when it comes to implementation, I think that the pandemic highlighted this as well. We still rely on people moving things around the building site. And And the thing is, in the attempt to innovate, today we're facing the same problems, like with 50% less people, because workers tend to avoid construction jobs. So when I was looking at possibilities for like connecting robots and restoration, I started tracking some ongoing trends that I consider relevant for my investigation. And a relevant trend involving tools is happening in manufacturing, which is a sector from which architects are absorbing innovation. And which means that the cost of labor is constantly increasing, while the cost of automation is dropping. And at the same time, technology, both hardware and software, is evolving and getting more accessible. So before getting into my research, I'm sharing one precedent, and a couple of precedents actually, starting from this one, that I think the best support my case in terms of robotics and heritage integration. This specific one is the construction of the Sagrada Familia. Can be that I consider a high-profile conservation project that confronted design time, labor, material, but it's a very unique project. Although instead I advocate for like a widespread adoption of this kind of technologies that can lead changes in culture and education. So during my doctoral years, I had the pleasure to collaborate with the Shape. I think you all know Enrico Dini. With him, I looked closely at the reconstruction of the Palmares Arch after the conflict in Syria in 2015. So some like relevant aspects related to this project are the fact that the arch was built and shown in London, but the thing is, was built while the archaeological site was still not accessible. And in that period, the scientific community from over the world came together to collect data, create an open source 3D model that was used for implementation and actually for robotic construction. So that's a great example on how, like with these kind of tools, we have the ability to react promptly to any condition of risk of the global cultural heritage. And this is how the reconstruction of the arch resonated around the world through the press to highlight the cultural relevance of what was happening through this demonstration. So at this point, I had this experience. I started creating like a taxonomy of case studies in the field of robotics and restorations. I tried like to converse these things together, to converse these fields, trying to understand the difficulties that could derive from like the integration of machines in the conservation building site. And what we're seeing here is basically how like the setup that I use to think about a lab experiment that could express this concept. So, and because there are different approaches to carry out an architectural restoration, they could be more or less conservative, especially when we have to add parts that went lost. I choose as case studies those projects that I believe express the layer of modernity through materials and statics, and I think the robots could have a role in this kind of conversation by expressing data and expressing like new tools in conservation processes. This is a moment which I needed the tools. So for an academic here, I had the possibility to carry out my doctoral research at Lawrence Tech in Detroit, where I conducted my lab experiment. And I wanted to highlight the fact that the culture of manufacturing in Detroit is important, is part of the local heritage. There's also a certain aesthetic of manufacturing related to that. And being an LTU made me aware of how this culture is still being spread, because robots that come from the automotive industry get used in schools, have a second life in schools. And so there's an idea of the democratization of the tools embedded in this process. Just to show you a bit of context, Detroit is the city with the highest concentration of robots in the US that come from the heavy industry, which is a driving economic force in the Midwest. So in Detroit, I found my test bed. It's beautiful, abandoned church in Detroit downtown, built in 1911, Gothic revival style, registered as national landmark. And with a research group, we did the geometric survey, we obtained the point cloud of the building. And then I wanted to use a specific case of damage just to study it. And of course, my idea was to use robots on site, but because of budget limitations and because I didn't have any previous knowledge exposure on robotic fabrication, I really needed to learn how to use all the tools and to understand the workflow and to do that in a low risk environment in a fab lab. So with the ambition of operating on site as a master builder, I wanted to use additive manufacturing to fill a wall gap. That was my specific application case. I wanted to work with geometric constraints, irregular surfaces, and I wanted to use additive manufacturing as an explicit connection between physical and digital. And in this case, I used raw clay because it's cheaper and usable. I'm not explaining too much my experiment because I know that you guys are used to see more advanced tools and processes. But the outcome of the workflow to me was like a very specific application on a technological unit that I refer to as a proof of concept informed by advanced ways of making. And the results allow me to create a matrix in which I confronted my workflow, which I stated as like low profile with speculations on possible follow-ups. And of course, I see possibilities of informing the process with more advanced and sophisticated tools. But also the research allowed me to position the role of the architect in this conversation. We know that digital fabrication today is compressing the distance between design and making by connecting instantly digital data and material production. And this makes architects master builders that understand the tools of production. And also I like to highlight the fact that before the Industrial Revolution, every architectural outcome was customized, was a prototype. So these are all recurring, contemporary sort of conditions we're discussing. And I also want to interpret the notion of customization and architecture in restoration, because if in architecture, mass customization is delivered after collecting sort of stable inputs from the clients who seek for adaptation of living standards for personal needs, I believe that when it relates to cultural heritage, it's the other way around. So the design input comes from damaged buildings that require case-by-case analysis and recovery applications. And so the wide range of options make the input instead of unstable issue. And then through customization, we can perpetuate the value in the future of a monument, of a historical building. I believe that higher education plays a fundamental role in the context of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. When I was at Lawrence Tech, I had the chance to teach a robotic fabrication class with students without any previous knowledge of robotic fabrication. And the students worked on the realization of speculative scale models by taking advantage of the potential of the robotic tool to iterate design processes. And I consider the class a second experimentation within my dissertation as well, imagining that in the future of construction, the downstream phases of making architecture will include robotics. And this is the approach to train the future master builder. And actually, I'm happy to see how this class will be used as a workshop within the Digital Futures Consortium. Automation and robotics, again, they connect design and production, and this has a great potential because if we look at the McClintock curve, we see that in the traditional design processes, basically the longer we wait to make design changes, the more expensive the project becomes, and this is a crucial point in restoration when even like construction decisions are made on site. And so like my research advocates for the possibility of shifting the design phase forward and extend the project elaboration to achieve higher building quality. And to advance the research, we need more capacity for people, so for people to be able to use robots, robotics. And with this purpose, I'm currently involved in the creation of a nonprofit Fab Lab in Detroit for the built environment, which is called Citizen Robotics. So there's a new robot coming to town in Detroit soon. And the aim, the goal of Citizen Robotics is to provide access to robots and training, upskilling the local construction workforce. And the more I talk about my dissertation, and the more I think that it's not necessarily all about the thing that I made in the lab, that I created in the lab, but like really I'm trying to lay a groundwork for potential tech transfer from one sector to another. And I'm building a case for why this technology could have an application which is impactful in the construction industry. So here is how I'm advancing on my thinking about the master builder. It's how I'm advancing my research approach. This is a project that I'm developing with Dob and Citizen Robotics. We're trying to 3D print a house. And finally, I'm experiencing firsthand how advanced technology could change the construction industry and could upskill the construction workforce. And I think that these elements, when they come together, could be economic generators through training and education. And thanks so much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Sara. You were under a minute, so that's wonderful. You're setting a good precedent. So I want to, I guess, introduce Neil Leach, Philip Juan, and Marie Sabel. So if any of our panelists wants to step in, but before we do that, Sara, can you please tell us what year are you in your PhD studies? And did you already propose, or are you ready in the ready just to present your dissertation? Where are you on the on
just finished? I just finished, actually.
Okay, well then congratulations. So now we have context. So Philip, do you want to go first?
Yes, very good presentation, Sara. Doing really fantastic job. Because we're actually very similar doing robotics study. I'm teaching a group right now in Shanghai, and the team right now have like 30 robotics as a big robotic army. We engage a lot to the industry right now. So what they're doing, actually, I think I quite appreciate your thinking on the democracy process of robotics for future citizens and future scenarios in the architecture, design, and robotic fabrication. It's really meaningful for you talking about reduction of the waste and the save energy and make more efficient construction process by implementation of robotics as a new tool. Especially your topic is about heritage. And so I think it's very meaningful for the robotic and AI, this kind of new technology, not only just as a manifesto or paradigm shift, a formalism manifesto. It's meaningful go to the specific scenarios like the heritage preservation. I think it's really interesting for the scanning and digital twin to coupling the modeling with the real fabrication process. And I find it's quite amazing for you talking about this kind of two-pass planning in the heritage printing. I think it will be a great challenge because the effectors normally is a very big scale things, and also the crafts you develop should be not so easy because it's not just an effector. You have a very big instrument equipment that's followed by the robotics. So it's not easy as a diagram showing to planning the toolbox. But actually, I think that's if you have time, could you please briefly introduce how you can print in such a small space and accurately position the boundary and how to make the different two materials, the original material and the new, maybe concrete, maybe ceramic, to filling in such a small space, and to have any toolbox for this kind of two-pass planning. And that is maybe the key aspects, challenge for this technology. That's the first question. Secondly, my team actually, we did develop a plugin in Grasshopper named FU Robot, and we have very specific research in this kind of two-pass planning and the effectors and how to introduce this new working flow to different people, and we open it on GitHub, and we invited and also different researchers. You can upload your research methodology to this platform. I think it's an open source and sharing platform by FU Robot, and to share this kind of new working flow developed by different team. And after you make use of this platform, we can sharing our vision and our methodology. So welcome if you can check the FU Robot on GitHub, and welcome to have any communication or discussion on it. Thank
Absolutely,
you.
That sounds amazing. And yeah, and you mentioned something. I mean, with my dissertation, I had to deal really with two aspects in parallel: the cultural aspect and the technical aspect. So, like, I had to make all experts in conservation happy, by saying that my workflow could be reversible. That I had to create a narrative around the possible applications. It's tough in Italy because, especially in the university where I've concluded my PhD, they're very conservative in terms of restoration. So I really needed to be very precise, finding the right case studies, talking about Carlos Scarpa did these amazing things and being pretty violent on the cultural heritage, right? So it was a very intense conversation to try to convince them of the possibility, just to start the conversation, let's say, about this. And about the technical aspect, it's very complicated. And as you could see, for instance, in my little application case, there were some points that I couldn't reach because you have to spend a lot of time developing sophisticated end effectors to operate in certain conditions. I didn't have a feedback loop system. So my robot wasn't smart. So I was just relying only on how I designed the toolpaths. And the difference in my process was that usually, when you 3D print something in a lab, you just do the contours and you keep going, go up with the layers. While in my case, I really needed to calculate all the rotations of the robot and the end effector within the toolpath so that I could avoid collisions with all those undercuts in the section. So that's why I wasn't 100% successful. There's a lot to do about that. But now I'm in conversation with a research group within my university, actually. We developed, they developed, my colleagues, a project called Inception that deals with documentation of cultural heritage. And we were in conversation to talk about an infrastructure in which you could, I could send a toolpath to a conservation expert, and those experts could create, we call that customized survey model that can accept sort of robo files to be integrated in the restoration process, which is a daydream to me to see this happening, but requires teams and requires a lot of work for sure. And I think you agree, right? To see how complicated this is.
Well, thank you very much, Philip. Do you have any follow-up questions, or Marisabel or Neil? Do you want to jump in?
Marisabel, do you want to say something?
Let me see. But again, Thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation. I had a question. I saw there were the two aspects. One is the working in the restoration and bringing these tools to bear in the historical context. The other was that I thought was very interesting, and I wanted you to speak a little bit more about, which is the idea of the sort of the citizen. What did you call it? The organization.
Excuse me.
The organization that you had created.
Citizen Robotics, the Fab
Citizen
Lab.
Robotics. And was that also a part of your dissertation? I mean, because there's the social historical aspect that you focused right now on technical issues, but was that also part of the development of your dissertation as to how you could implement this? And I'm saying this because it wasn't lost to me that you showed us Diego Rivera's fabulous mural in Dearborn, which of course was that sort of the elegy to the auto worker and the sort of the social, the new society that labor was going to implement in the Americas at that point in time. So I mean, you show that mural, so that made me think, well, is there a social historical dimension that you're also incorporated or have incorporated into your research? I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Thanks, and thanks for mentioning also the part of my presentation. I was real quick during my explanation, but yeah. So in the timeline that happened after, so I consider this like a follow-up of my research. Mm-hmm. So I got to a point like within my dissertation that I concluded my proof of concept. And meanwhile, I was teaching a class. So like these two things together made me sort of merge the knowledge that I was acquiring and talk about education, talk about training, and talk about the master builder and how like current students could become in the future the first real operators of the fourth industrial revolution. So these things came together with the dissertation. In the timeline, then I started collaborating with Citizen Robotics. It's actually like we purchased the robot like 2 weeks ago, and we're starting projects. So that came after, but I still try to frame the work that I'm doing with Citizen Robotics, like in my approach, in the way I'm seeing things, the way I'm working in Detroit, and I'm understanding what I call the manufacturing heritage, that I think it's beautiful. And I think it's just great to be part of this momentum in which we're trying to upskill people and to talk about culture. And of course, like dealing with heritage is extremely complicated. So the same way I did some sorry, you wanted to,
to say that's, I think, sorry to interrupt you. I think that was the thing that was fascinating to me is the fact that you were actually implementing a study, not just of your cultural heritage from the sort of the actual infrastructural architectural point of view, but also from the social historical point of view, investigating that sort of the role of manufacturing and the role of the worker. Now you mentioned the sort of the master builder, which of course the workers in Detroit were not necessarily master builders. They were actually part of a chain of operations. And so there's a distinction there to be made, but I find that very fascinating that in parallel to actually your development of your proof of concept, you also were bringing along the story that, of its, the sort of the broader impacts, this broader social economic impact. And I appreciate that very much.
Thanks so much for your feedback. And also, again, because I know that before dealing with heritage, it's extremely complicated. Like starting with constructions, it's sort of easier. At least it's a starting point. Like I'd like to go from there and develop more. And let's see if I can turn around and get back to heritage with the same process.
Of course.
Thanks a lot for your comment.
Thank you, Marcelo. Neil?
Yeah, just a very brief. Well, I don't know, but so I was going to say, Sarah. I mean, I guess this idea about conservation. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I was a translator of Alberti, and it was kind of curious because I did this in the computer science department in Cambridge, where we were above the Babbage lecture theatre, surrounded by these geeks who were doing AI. It was amazing, and anyway, and it kind of makes me think about because Alberti was really a revolutionary in his own time, as was Brunelleschi, right? And I always think that Alberti, had he been around now, we'd be looking at AI. I mean, apart from the fact his name begins in A and ends in I, right? That's one thing. But in terms of Brunelleschi, I was thinking of, the ingenuity of the way he developed that mechanism to complete the Duomo in Firenze, which I could imagine some kind of mini robots now in your vault, maybe. And I think, I'm sure you could invoke the heritage of your ancestors. And I just think that these guys are revolutionaries. And I think the real problem about history is we think about it something in the past, but in their own day, they were complete revolutionaries. I mean, Alberti was the person who really helped to promote the Italian language, and so on and so on and so on. Anyway, so I just thought that was kind of like something you were actually picking up on something quite important in history. But the second thing I wanted to ask you about it, in some ways, I mean, you're in a country where you every time you get a degree, you become a doctor or dottoressa, right? You just get and I'm not quite sure what the status of a PhD is in Italy. But I wanted it to be, maybe because you've been straddling two different continents, you've been working in the States and also in Italy, to offer some reflections on the differences between Italian PhD culture and American PhD culture, because we use the same term, but I mean, I've come across such a difference in approaches. I mean, I was once asked, I think I mentioned earlier, that I was also asked to grade a PhD thesis from the Technical University of Istanbul, the top university in Turkey, and it was 10,000 words long. And I said, well, can I see the full transcript? I can't just. So I don't know what your reflections are on the difference between the Italian PhD system and the American one.
Do you want me to be honest? Is this recorded and streamed and everything?
There are only 300 people watching.
Yes, it is. Just be honest.
No, I'm kidding. No, those are positive reflections, but like the thing that comes in my mind now is the fact that, like, in Italy, it's usually we're theory based, and the method is God method. And we have to prove and to express why we're taking certain decisions, why I'm doing this, why. Oh, by the way, my dissertation is like this, and I know that in the US it's like totally different length of the document. And the thing is, you have to spend so much time explaining things. So, and this happened to me, but also to many other colleagues. The fact that when you go abroad, you're more independent. And you feel more free to do stuff. Like, even if like you want to try stuff and you're like, okay, let's try it out. I can be wrong. I don't know. I want to test it. Like, I've noticed that there's this sort of difference. Like in Italy, they tend to guide you, to give you a lot of bibliography, and you have to be like, you have to defend yourself like from the first to the last word. But then when it comes to, okay, when you in here, they tell you like, okay, let's try to propose an experiment. You're so scared because you're like, oh my gosh, like, is this gonna work? Are they gonna accept it? Instead, when you go abroad, like, you just try things, and you can, and because I'm not saying that you do like random stuff, of course, but like you can test, and once you test things, you understand them. And like, I understood how the robotic fabrication worked, for instance. And for like a year and a half, I kept talking about that, but not knowing what it was. And so it's like, I think that we have like a different degree of freedom in terms of like trying things. Because like even trying is sort of, to me, was very important to learn by doing. And it's something that we should start absorbing in the Italian culture, I think. So that's why I think they worked well at the end, having this conversation between the Italian system and the American system.
No,
Okay.
that's really insightful. I think this is very important, because normally, if you're a supervisor, your only real experience maybe is your own PhD, and I don't know, and I've encountered so many different approaches. And I've taught doctoral students on 4 different continents now, and there's such a range of different approaches, and I think it's important for people to know that. And there's a multiplicity of different ways of writing and approaches. So anyway, thank you so much, Sara, for sharing your reflections. That was really useful. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Grazie.
Well, before we move on, I also wanted to thank Sara for being up at 3 in the morning to deliver this. So I just wanted to announce to every PhD that is the most hardcore, brave thing that I could ever imagine. So thank you very much, Sara. And if you can please join us for the others, that would be great. If not, have a good evening. But now next to Diego. So I will introduce Diego Pinochet. And he is coming from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, if we're all not aware. He's presenting computational design and interactive fabrication methodologies. And Diego, before you start, can you please let us know what year you're in your PhD to give us some context? Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you for the invitation. I just finished my 6th semester, my 3rd year at the PhD at the Design and Computation Group under the guidance of Professor Terry Knight. I am in a moment at my PhD where I will submit in the following weeks my thesis proposal. That is something that you usually do at the end of the 3rd year and before starting your 4th year. And yeah, I will show you now a couple of basically like fragments of that proposal that basically talk about the motivations of my work. That is a continuation, or let's say like an evolution of the things that I did in my master's, my 2nd master's degree, the one that I did here at MIT, that I got in 2015. So I will share my presentation and I will start. Let me swap the screens. Can you see the presentation and not my notes? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So again, my name is Diego Pinochet, and my presentation, not my dissertation, is called So What? Design as Making in a Technology Mediated World. And I will start with like a couple of like simple and very, let's say like naive assertions or claims that basically my dissertation or my research is about making. And it starts with the premise that to make equals, at least to a certain degree, to design. To be more precise, this dissertation or research is about making as designing or designing as making in a technology mediated world. And it seeks to establish a new contemporary definition of making as a holistic, aesthetic, and creative process through the use of computation. And when I talk about computation, I'm not talking about precisely like digital computation, but I'm talking about computation in the broad sense of the word, meaning that basically I see computation in the same way as we talk about it in our group. That means calculating, right? Or basically like a method for thinking about design. And the object of this investigation is, in this dissertation, is to determine how interactivity can reformulate the interaction between design and making and representing through technology. So basically my research has a very strong component on materiality, for example. It inquires into computation as the enabler of newly forming propositions about the designer's role, tools, and materials toward creating original work and meaning. That is something that has been of my interest for a while now. In my first master's degree that I got in Catholic University in Chile, that was in 2008 or 9, I don't remember. I started with this idea of like this digital dichotomy between what is in the computer and what is basically in the physical world. Then I continue with this in my second master's degree at MIT with my thesis that was called Making Gestures, that talk about the question basically of how can we think and make originally through technology. And I mean, I don't know, maybe you have seen some of that work, but I want to talk to you about some of the thoughts that I have been like developing in the past 3 years, and that had a relation with like how historically the separation between designing and making has been incrementally growing with every technological implementation that inevitably distanced the intellectual from the technical, and revealing a gap between what corresponds to the domain of the ideas and domain of physical objects. It is not news that the shift from medieval times, basically to the Renaissance, came with several changes on how design was perceived or even like considered. So one of the key things, and also I know that the issue about like readings or things like that, if I can like share, probably I will share the list of readings that I'm making, but I just wanted to mention that most of the things that I read lie outside of the world of architecture, and my research is not necessarily focused on architecture, but design as a broad thing. So I wanted to say like how, for example, one of the things that we can speculate is that basically the question of meaning was basically like separated, or basically was like let's say like equilibrated in or reached like a different equilibrium after the advent of the Renaissance, basically where the intellectual, if we look at, for example, like Husserl's definition of meaning, the transcendental or semantic world was separated from the technical, the formal and syntactic, and basically the technical took more relevance. And basically things like beauty or taste were like always confronted with this idea of like logic or structure. And this is like a very rough timeline. Again, these are like chunks of my dissertation. These are not the final slides, but basically what I was saying, that these technological layers that were added to the design process, or basically to design, redefine this relationship between design and making. So we have, for example, like the architectural design, the invention of architectural design, for example, by Alberti, and the emergence of lineamenta, and the emergence of basically what has been the bridge between the world of the ideas and the world of like physical objects, that is representation. What we saw that Alberti invented with the lineamentum, and things like prescription, prescripto, and you can read about it like from like many authors, starting from like the more contemporary ones like Mario Carpo, but you can find a lot of information about that. The interesting thing is that design changed a lot, because basically design turned into like an allographic, if we revisit, for example, like Nelson Goodman, and of course also Mario Carpo, basically when you make a recipe, right, the world of the ideas that Alberti was like pretty explicit about it, that lied in the mind of the architect, basically are expressed through a set of prescriptive rules so other people can build it. And we have seen, for example, like the advent of sorry, my computer's a little bit stuck. Okay, so how can we can see also, like, for example, from the invention of like descriptive geometry, and basically a revolution that also started in the 17th century, where mathematics and systematization of reality started this even more the separation between the formal and transcendental, and basically started to give more importance to a structure instead of like let's say like the semantic world or area of design. So basically what happened, and this is something that you can find, for example, in Perez Gomez, meaning was embedded into a description, a description of reality. Basically, based on like Newtonian, for example, or Galilean science, reality was reduced, or basically it was like influenced by positivism, and it was like expressed into like a reduction structure, right? Reduction structure. And then, for example, and this was necessary, or basically was like a pre-step for industrial revolution that enabled by the systematization of reality, if we can quote like Perez Gomez, led to a discretization of the design process, a divide to conquer approach in the light of technological advances and the incremental complexity of buildings. For example, systems like electricity or water, or like all of the things that started to be added to buildings that made them more complex, generating the final split between the arts, the sciences, and the crafts. Basically, like the design process, the design and making process was chopped according to domains of expertise or domains of knowledge. And on that, we can, for example, find definitions about like this split between art, sciences, and craft in Williams or even like Wilhelm Flusser. Then we have the origins of computation and a new theory for thinking about the world that enabled the emergence of digital computers, a new way to describe reality through numbers, basically Turing machines, for example, and how digital computation transformed production, where there was, after World War II, there was a need for producing better and faster. And that boosted the research on automation, especially at MIT, where we saw the emergence of computer-aided manufacturing, which gave later origin to computer-aided design. That is something that not many people like acknowledge, but yeah, we're seeing one slide. I haven't changed my slide, by the way, because I'm still explaining this. So, oops, wait, now. So where was I? Here. So basically what happened, basically like CAM gave origin to computer-aided design. And basically like this was because there was a need for an interface or integrated system for representing and talking machine language. And computation emerged as a way to regain also authority lost. Basically, like we saw, and we can read like many authors on how architects train as an eccentric artist by inheriting like the academic way of like, I don't know, like they call the Beaux-Arts, for example, was confronted with professional practice. And basically, the architect was trained as an eccentric artist, but employed as a drafting monkey, let's say. And basically how through intelligent systems, acting as clerks, partners, or even replacing designers, as Steve Koons was postulating at the late 50s, early 60s, or for example, changing architecture and construction forever, as Marvin Minsky predicted also in the mid 60s, that will happen by the year 2000. So there was a new way of also thinking through computers, and architect became closer to that because it was a way of designing in a different way, and maybe having like a new control about the things that we ideate, but also manifest in the physical world. But that is interesting because I put this passage from Pascal that is in the first page of Alchemy and AI, Artificial Intelligence, written by the always amazing Howard Dreyfus, one of the most critical persons about AI in the 60s and the 70s. And basically it takes a lot of relevance because we see that how, for example, like this discretization or mathematization or systematization of the design process into formal rules and combinatorial and symbolic combination created exactly that, a way of where, or basically a system where the meaning of design is embedded in the system itself. And basically it loses, for example, like some sort of like contact with reality. We also see like the Searle's Chinese room paradigm, where it talks like a little bit about that. For example, like how, for example, things that we use work as a black box. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that what happened with this, like over time, with this addition of technological layers, what was thought at the beginning as an Albertian dichotomy between the world of ideas and the world of construction actually evolved into a trichotomy between the world of ideas, the world of the things that are represented as a vessel to move to the physical manifestation of things. So even though it brought like many positive things or areas to think about, there is something that it's around not the what, the why, but the so what of the use of technology. It seems that the gap filled by representation makes us or made us confuse technology for technique, and the how and why that led you to think, basically led us more to think about like the so what. Why do we need, for example, technology in in design or in architecture if we are not using it, for example, like productive purposes. That's what I'm trying to say. So for example, while technology, oh, sorry, I jumped a couple of slides. While technology deals with...
sorry, excuse me, Diego, we have a few more minutes. So if, just letting you know, 2 more minutes.
Oh, yeah. It's fine. So while technology deals with subjugating the external world for efficiency, technique deals with knowledge derived by being concerned with more existential problems. Basically, it's contingent. And this is one of the critiques, like design as prescriptive and meaning by being embedded in the system basically creates a disembodiment. And basically, there is an standardization of meaning. And this is something similar to what we see with AI today. Basically, when we have an oracle giving you a ground truth. The domain of the formal basically is, it's basically like the harbinger of meaning according to this new way of designing. And basically where all is represented and explained. All is model, all is data, all is clusters, all are distribution, optimizations, curves, and so on. Therefore, everything is basically like known, right? We assume that knowledge is there. But what I'm trying to say here is that we see that most of the efforts, and I know that I have 1 minute left, is based on vision. That's what I'm trying to say. That basically because of representation is the main vehicle that connects ideas and the physical world, basically we have a very ocular-centric way or approach to technology. And what I'm trying to say here is that we can have like a more, let's say like tactile. If we talk about like aesthetic experience, and I will go fast through this, basically aesthetic experience is something that we are interested at as designers, because basically it's the experience or basically the, let's say like the fun part for us as designers. It's not only about vision, but it's also about like touch and language, of course. So my thesis is structured around basically this, as making gestures, making meaning, making sense, and making aesthetically, to come up with this definition of design as making. And for that, I'm more focused on the side of AI and machine learning. I did a minor in machine learning during my first 3 years and PhD and the PhD, where basically I'm working more with reinforcement learning and AI and ML deep learning techniques that do not involve only visual, but also, let's say, like more behavioral type of workflows. Focusing on basically this idea of that through gestures, we can create a communication, not to interact or not to control, but basically to interact with machines and express ourselves in real time. So basically what you see here are some of the advances that I have been working on in the past 2 years, like basically interactive systems and connecting this to the calculation of inverse kinematics and more intelligent system based, for example, on soft actor critic, or like basically like more reinforcement learning to control. And this is something that I wanted to show you, and this is my last slide, because believe it or not, at MIT, we don't have proper equipment or a lot of robots. I had to build my own robot, and this is something that I'm finishing right now. So I have a lot of ideas, a lot of like skills and things to work on. So if you have the robots and you're interested in collaborate, please call me, because right now I only have this teeny tiny robot to work and test my research. Sorry for being like over the time.
Diego, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. There's so much that you presented, and I just wanted to invite our guests, Neil and Philip, if they wanted to contribute to any feedback. Do you want to start off, Marisabel? Do you want to start off with any feedback?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
So
thank you.
Thank you, Diego, for your wonderful presentation. Of course, I'm familiar a lot with sort of the Terry Knight's work, as well as with George Steiny and everybody up at MIT, because of the sort of intense collaboration with the shape grammar, folks at Georgia Tech. I had a question for you, because one of the things, you're bringing up a lot of really fabulous things to think about, and of course this is your presentation for Digital Futures and not the actual presentation for your dissertation proposal, but it would really, from my point of view, I think you have said a lot, but it also is actually a lot that has to be parsed. For instance, anything as simple as the word meaning and how you are kind of throwing that word around a lot in your presentation right now. It's fascinating, but I want to know more. What are you reading? Exactly how are you parsing this idea of meaning? And also, what is the timeline to this meaning? So all of these concepts that you have been throwing out kind of in a very exuberant way, I have to say. And of course, it's really fascinating. I think you are actually really do need to give us a little bit more of a history. I hate to say this, that even though you are really kind of projecting towards a future, we need to know what that intellectual history is, because it's really what you have just spent about 10 minutes talking about is an intellectual history that we need to understand a little bit further, or at least as somebody kind of listening to your ideas about the dissertation, that I would like to know more. Personally, I would like to know more about what you're reading, also how you're breaking this down, because it's very interesting, it's fascinating. But unless you give us more, we can't give you more.
Yeah, I know, and I understand. I mean, this is why I wanted to put this for this presentation. I mean, it's like almost like 1 hour of presentation, trying like getting chunks to fit there and to actually engage a conversation exactly about that, or a discussion about that. Basically, yeah, I'm talking about meaning because and also like making, because my research over the past, let's say like 8 to 9 years has been about fabrication, and how usually when we talk about technology, and I mentioned this at the last part of the presentation, has been always focused on representation, on vision, and basically when you start going outside the field of architecture or the field of design and reading, for example, from anthropologists, basically we listen a lot in the discussions about like architecture and design, the word knowledge, for example, how we produce knowledge and through the tools that we use. But when you start like researching about like knowledge, about cognition, and you go out the field of architecture, you find, for example, in archaeology and anthropology, basically a lot of authors that talk very interesting things about like how, for example, intelligence emerged not from language, explicit like only language, but also from touch. And I started reading more about like people, first people like, for example, like Andy Clark, and of course like Bruno Latour, but also like Lambros Malafouris, that is like related to this material engagement theory, or this concept of the leaky brain from Andy Clark. It basically says that we learn and we do things with our basically we learn also with our hands, not only with our eyes. And when you go, for example, to authors like David Bohm, for example, when you combine that with the idea of original work, that is something that for me as a designer, as an architect, I'm very interested, and also like the concept of authorship. You try to come up with this definition about, okay, what original is, or where originality comes from. And for example, if you read like physicists like David Bohm, they said that there is a tight relationship between meaning and action, but also from the action and the original. And that has a direct relationship with gestures, because basically you can never, and that is something that is proved by cognitive science, you can never make the same gestures. So every movement that you make, even if you repeat it like 10 million times, it will never be the same. And basically when you move, when you touch, when you interact with technology in a different way, you are making mistakes. And that is something that, for example, when you use artificial intelligence in a visual way, for example, you miss that opportunity, because I mean, artificial intelligence is about loss, right? Minimizing the loss, minimizing the cost, for example, of something. So basically you are trying to do the opposite. You're situating yourself in the opposite side of the spectrum. So my claim, for example, or my goal for this research, and it was not, I'm aware of that, it's not explicit in this presentation, is how can you reconcile both worlds beyond the productive? Because technology was always oriented towards like productive. when you look at technology towards like optimization, toward efficiency, or even like the claims during the 60s that you will get rid of the tedious part of representing, so you will have more time to be creative. That is something that still doesn't happen, because basically in these translations from ideas to a paper to a code to a 3D model to a G code to a machine, there is a huge gap. There are a lot of black boxes that basically make this obscure. You lose that type of interaction or feedback with materials, with words, with things that ever change, that are not represented inside a computer in the form of like a machine learning model, let's say.
Oh, sorry, I just want to step in. Maybe I can contribute a little bit to this. I just wanted to ask you, I think you're at your third year, so I guess I'm mimicking my advisor. So what would be your thesis statement? Like, what is the grand problem you're trying to solve? And then how does your methodology help you in solving that problem? So because I'm hearing the way that you're describing this, you're describing it as a theoretician, a historian, an architect, a designer, a computational, I would say a computer sci, maybe. So you're a hybrid of maybe 5 or 6 different typologies of academics. But what is the new field you're trying to create with your research?
I don't think I'm creating like a new field, but basically, let's say my statement will be, I mean, I don't have it here now with my computer what the actual statement is, but I can say from what I show you, it will be like, how can we reconcile, let's say, the way we use technology in a very prescriptive way, in a more, let's say, how you say, like, oh, I forgot the word. Basically, to create like a more circular and, let's say, like autopoietic, let's say, like feedback. That is something that we don't have today, because I'm focusing in the the creation part of design in general. We know, for example, I know that we can use technology to solve, to optimize, to fabricate in a very precise way. This idea of digital continuum, for example, that started with Branko Kolarevic like 20 years ago, or Bill Mitchell talking about the new possibility of like designing and making yourself, we can do it. I mean, we have plenty of work about that. But the question is like, what happened to design? And this is when I'm talking about something that has to do with meaning. And this is why, for example, I'm very close to and obsessed with reading David Bohm, for example, that he talks about things that are very related to design, what creating is, or basically what I think a designer should do to come up with new, not problem solving, but basically like finding new ways of expressing a problem to put, or to, let's say, exacerbate reality. That talks about like there is a connection with action, and that is something that we don't have today in the way that we use these workflows where technology is involved. So my idea is basically, how would you reduce that gap again between ideas and between objects?
Diego, I wanted to thank you very much, because it sounds like you're at the point of the dissertation. I guess when I was at the point of my dissertation, I had like the literature review in my head, and then how does my application in my projects express the core issue of your research? And so I look forward to hearing, to following your career and how to move forward in helping others, you know, since you're teaching. I mean, how would you help your students, and how would you communicate to your colleagues how you're moving forward into the world? Because your dissertation is just the first step. The next step is you'll probably have your own lab, you'll be raising money, you'll be writing grants, and you'll be, you know, creating new alliances. I mean, that's the hope of the dissertation. You're the future of the field. So I just wanted to thank you very much, Diego. Any last thoughts before we move on for Neil or Philip?
Well, maybe I should say this is. I mean, Diego, thank you. It's very nice to see someone who's so competition advanced engaging with these kind of theoretical topics. Maybe at some point we can go and have a. I think we just like a beer, maybe 5 beers to talk about all this because there's a lot of stuff here. I almost want to say one thing, and that is that I think in terms of your historical sources, I would encourage you to be more suspicious. I'm deeply suspicious of Mario Carpo. I mean, really, seriously, just I would not read anything, especially that understanding of Alberti. I think that's completely wrong, personally. I think Alberti was somebody who was much more dialectical in his approach. Often people think that he's kind of based on aesthetics. Actually, he's got a very fundamental understanding of structure. And in our translation, we made a mistake in the translation when we talked about ornament as being something that is applied. That was completely wrong. You can't change it. The translation came out in 1988. There's no way you can change it, right? But what he also says in terms of ornament and structure is to say that a wall, that he says on one hand that the column is a principal ornament of architecture. We can understand that within a kind of postmodern context, fine. But then he says that a row of columns is nothing else but a wall with a series of holes cut in them. So I think, I see him as really straddling the Gothic world and the Renaissance world. He is partly structural, as indeed was Brunelleschi, right? And partly aesthetic. So I would challenge that view. I certainly would challenge Alberto Perez Gomez. I mean, Alberto was a student of Dalibor Vesely. I was also a student of Dalibor Vesely, and that's partly why I'm interested in digital in the first place, because he banned computers from the studio, right, at Cambridge. So really be suspicious about that. And the question about meaning and so on, it took me to get to Manuel de Landa to really get over that kind of obsession representation where they were talking about materials, but not about material behaviors or material philosophy. It was just simply a kind of poetics of materials, which I found really, really disturbing. Yeah. Finally, one final thing, just in terms of oculocentrism, we had a discussion with, I don't know if you know Erin Manning, but she was on our discussion group the other day. She has a book called The Politics of Touch, which you probably know. And we had a discussion about this, and I said that I don't think that distinction between oculocentrism and touch is that clear, because to my mind, vision is ideational. In other words, when we look at something, we can already imagine what it's going to feel like. If you walk up to a doorknob and you're about to hold, what kind of feeling how hard it's going to be, how cold it's going to be, whatever. So I think vision actually conveys all those things. So I think the notion of the dialectic of neatly unpicking those things and seeing what is repressed beneath the surface is a really interesting kind of way of doing it. Of course, it's very difficult because you then kind of wishy-washy. If you want to make a polemic, you have to ignore the other side of the argument, right? But ultimately, you have to be dialectical about it. So, I mean, I'll finish with one thing, and that is to say, in Cambridge, where I was studying the other Cambridge, Dalibor and Peter Carl was so critical about computation, but Dalibor was an engineer by training, and Peter Carl had this kind of studio once where he started doing virtual reality. It was like there was a repressed fascination in exactly what they were denying. So that's the kind of logic that you could look at. And I mean, but I'd love to have a conversation. I really respect your work, and I really respect the fact that you're not just taking this viewpoint, but be suspicious. I will finish at one point to say that there is also a theory of history which really tries to challenge the way that people present things and ask questions about how can you say that. So Derrida was all about that, challenging the way that people make these utterances and so on. So I mean, I would just ask you to ask even more questions, right? And to not have such a neat and tidy view of the world. It's much more complex than that. But thank you. It was a really, really stimulating discussion.
I'm super skeptical, by the way. Yeah, I mean, and just so you know that it's there, but it's good that you bring that, because I am with that mindset towards like all of these authors, and I love the work of Alberti, and I know that I'm very suspicious of Mario Carpo as well. So this is why you need to mention it a lot in order to come up with a counter argument to that. But thank you very much.
So the guy I think is interesting in terms of historian is Hayden White. Hayden White is a theorist of history, and he points out there are things that happen in history, but how we string them together in a narrative, we smuggle meaning in there, and we don't disclose the fact we're smuggling things in. So always question the basis of anything anyone's saying. But fantastic work. I look forward to seeing the results of this.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you, Diego. And do you have any advice for future PhDs that want to follow your path? Is there something that you would say to them?
I mean, it's be prepared to suffer a lot and be alone. I mean, in my case, many people don't know, but like the design and computation group at MIT is a very small group, and it works in a very different way to other PhD programs. I can say that, for example, I have friends at ETH working at Grammatzo Color, for example. It's like a more like hard, hands-on research. But here you are all alone. And basically you are kind of, especially in the design and computation group, forced to go outside the architecture. That happened to me at my master's as well. So my advice will be like, be strong, don't lose motivation, and just like be strong to overcome the imposter syndrome that always comes because you're alone and you have like feedback from your peers sometimes, but your advisor, and you're all the time saying that, oh, is this good enough? Maybe not. But it's a good path, but you suffer a lot, that's for sure.
Well, I think, Gustavo, that's probably the reason why it's good to have this platform where everyone working individually can share their ideas, and there's a kind of support group, because it's a deeply traumatic period. It's very personal. You're psychologically very stressful, and you are on your own. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted to reinforce what Neil said. You have a home here in Digital Futures if you ever want to come by and talk. And thank you very much for your time, Diego. And now we have to, yes, now we have to move on to our postdoctoral researcher, Dr. Xi Zhong Ming, and he will actually, he's at the Singapore Future City Lab. And if you don't mind, I don't have the title of your talk, but if you don't mind starting with your title. And did you recently graduate from your PhD, or?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I graduated last year in November.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So thank you very much for the context. Take it away.
Okay, let me share my screen. Do you see my slides now?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Zhongming. I'm currently a first-year postdoctoral researcher at the Future Cities Laboratory based in Singapore. So today my topic is about the project I'm working on. So it's not my own project, independent project. It's the bigger project I'm working for now in FCL. And the topic is Cities Knowledge Graph, and for planning a smart nation built on knowledge. A smart nation is an initiative of Singapore's master planning. And first, a little bit introduction about the research context. And the Cities Knowledge Graph project is situated in CREATE, which is a research initiative led by the Singapore National Research Foundation, where they brought different universities, as you can see here, the logos here, all together in the same building to foster collaborations among different research institutions and universities. And where I'm working at is the Singapore-ETH Center, and we have 3 parallel labs. One of them is the Future Cities Laboratory. I imagine you may heard about it before. This is where the Cities Knowledge Graph is situated in. And there are other programs, which is the Future Resilience System and Future Health Technologies, which started last year. And for the project, the Cities Knowledge Graph project is an intro-create, or a collaboration jointly between Cambridge in Singapore and ETH in Singapore. And here's we just started the project last year, and because of the COVID, and the team is slowly expanding. And from the Cambridge side, we're linking with the chemical engineering field. And from the ETH side, we are more linked with the Department of Architecture. So back to the topic, Cities Knowledge Graph. Well, as you may agree, planning is an information-driven craft that may need some digitally supported knowledge generation, as we have a boom of different data flying around, and planners use a lot of this information to support their planning decisions. And well, it may require three things, like the gathering information about planning the sites from various sources and process, and also the planners need to process this information. Well, there's also the planners needs to synthesize this information, the results and requirements from different fields and government departments, stakeholders, etc. Well, in the meantime, planners may have to envision different possibilities of the future. So meaning that there might be iterations of different, the entire planning process to like envision different possible features. And by comparing the different options and proposals, all the planners will develop the visions and designs and consensus about making master plans and about making decisions for the future development of the city. Well, the knowledge graph, well, Google used knowledge graph to enhance its search engine's results with information gathered from a variety of sources. Well, for example, if we key in Tongji University, Google will fetch and combine useful information and present it on the site within seconds. Well, for example, here you see some introductions of Tongji University and events coming up and some famous alumni. Well, this process requires a graph-based interoperability between informations of a vast number of sources and data sets. Well, how about in the master planning? If we apply the same knowledge graph technology into the master planning process to link all the data of, for example, the energy data or the master plan data, different data that can be used to support the master planning process together. So in the way to support the process of the master planners, the urban planners work on the master planning. And these process may involve some combining different sources of data and running some simulations and reasoning to make some assessments with some existing tools. And in the knowledge graph technology we're using here has three main advantages for city planning. So one is to increase or improve the data interoperability, because all the data is presented in the city's knowledge graph in ontologies, or in another way, we say a common language that represents the semantic meaning of the data rather than just their values. For example, the floor area ratio is used in the US, is used in China, but in Singapore, we use gross plot ratio. So in order to make all the data sets to speak the same language, and we develop ontologies to improve the data interoperabilities between different data sets, and when they meaning this using the same common languages. But also the other advantages of knowledge graph technology in city planning is about the computational interpretation and synthesis, because all the data is has semantic meaning, and which is machine readable using this common language. The computer will know what exactly each thing means and do reasonings based on the data. Well, the third advantage will be it offers advanced planning support options, or such as when you make different parallel scenarios and potential futures, and enable us to compare or to study the different potential possibilities of the future. While these process will also involve automated generation of visualizations, analysis, and knowledge inference, and iterative learning. Well, this slide shows how the collaborations between the chemical engineering from Cambridge and our Department of Architecture of ETH are collaborating on. So this is a tool that Cambridge has already developed called CARES JPark Simulator, which it can simulate the pollutant dispersal patterns using a real-time shape location, using linked open data sources. In the meantime, this is another example of how the Cambridge is now using the CARES JPark simulator, running parallel world simulations with different carbon tax policies. As you can see, these are the two scenarios. One is with a carbon tax of $5. One is $170 of the carbon tax, and how these are affecting the potential futures in the chemical engineering side. So our project brings their background of doing the knowledge graph for the chemical engineering side to the master planning side. Well, our approach tried to bridge the gap between the siloed urban data analytics and the master planning. Well, the first thing is the automation. We're trying to automate some aspects of data gathering and processing and generating useful information and knowledge about cities. In the meantime, we're integrating tools, concepts, and targets from different city planning departments based on the distinctive knowledge domains and to make rounded planning questions. Also, we're supporting advanced scenario planning features, allowing planners to study and compare parallel worlds or parallel potential futures with different variants of their planning proposals. And as you just mentioned, this project started last year, and we're currently developing the first demonstrator of applying the knowledge graph technology in master planning. And we'll demonstrate and test and improve the knowledge graph, city's knowledge graph through a number of use cases, while through regular feedback from planners, industry and government, all different domain experts and other stakeholders. This diagram shows like a basic demonstrator we're working on. The urban data are represented in the form of CDGML. And then we're linking these urban data with two of the urban modeling tools developed at ETH Zurich. One is about the energy demand forecast, energy supply system design, called Cities Energy Analyst, to assess the urban data for their energy potential or energy supply design, energy performances. And in another stream of research, we are also integrating this mobility modeling tool, which to simulate the human activities and to simulate the trips that created by the different land uses and the street paths and the human flow in between the different land use parcels with different land uses. So current city models focus on visualization, and our project is aiming at the next level, or a new level of digital urban twins that will be built on the linked urban data. So these are the tools I just mentioned. One is about energy, city and energy analyst, and this is city engine is what we imagine could be a way that we visualize the urban data I just mentioned before that linked by the ontologies we created for the knowledge graph technology. Well, that's so much for a brief introduction of the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation, Dr. Xi. I want to invite Philip to actually start off with feedback. Philip?
Thanks a lot for the presentation from Zhongming. I think it's a very interesting research topic. And this year, Zhongming present his paper in Cadre, and I'm honestly host the discussion. I think the research in the Singapore-ETH lab is really interesting. They have different topic today, and Zhongming present CKG, the City Knowledge Graph. I think that is extremely interesting to visualize the city data information and how to make use this information. I think that is extremely interesting. We set up a different workshops in Digital Futures this year. In Shanghai, at least two different startup company. One is Maice, another is Shuhui, and they all engage into the workshops. They're doing some like startup business model based on the city information. But I think what Zhongming present is really interesting. It's like a new infrastructure system, which developed by the university. And this is extremely interesting to make a very important scenario to rethinking on the fundamental technology like AI and machine learning, and how to figure out the potential possibility. And for example, the energy saving is a big issue for the city. Normally we have a different air conditioning system in unique buildings, but actually in Singapore, they have a very big infrastructure system to collecting the data from different buildings and to evaluate the possibility how to make full use of energy in a different zoning district. So that is something for the future to make use of AI and the new fundamental technology. I think Zhongming is very successful, engage and coordinate in the CKG project. I'm looking forward to see the future papers from Zhongming. And also, I think the way how Singapore organized the research is really interesting. We can talk about that because Singapore, University of Singapore, they invited different expertise, different co-PI from all over the world, including MIT, ETH, UC Berkeley, to engage, to join different research projects and different fundings followed by different teams. And actually, that is an open source and open way to make research, not just set up different team on the boundary of universities, on the reputation of different universities. That is something for the future because the reorganization of the research group is really meaningful. The collaborative laboratory is really important to introduce new technology, introduce more talent, young generation to participate to different research groups. Then that is really productive. I think a very big transformation from the research to the scenarios in the urban and architecture reality. So I think that is just not maybe a comment, but I think that's my impression to Zhongming's research. That's why we invite him to make introduction of what they're doing right now in Singapore. That is fantastic, and we appreciate the model from the Singapore-ETH Center, and also appreciate your introduction. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip.
Thank you. Before we move on, would you mind stop sharing your screen so we can see you and Philip in dialogue? Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, don't worry. I just want to make sure that we see Philip as well and you speaking. Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you for the remarks, Philip. Yes, it's kind of a following what Diego just mentioned, doing research on the difference of doing research in MIT or in ETH. So here we're all like, as when I was working on my doctoral thesis, and also now we're always in a collaboration of teams of different people with different background. Of course, we need to find our independent research interests, but at the same time, we're highly dependent on each other. For example, when I was doing my doctoral thesis, my background is architecture, urban design. And I was closely working with energy engineers who is working on energy demand forecast and energy supply system design. While now, in this current postdoctoral project, I'm bringing knowledge of master planning and urban design with knowledge background. So I'm familiar with the tool, the CD Energy Analyst. So that's why I'm helping the team to integrate the software into the knowledge graph. While in the meantime, we are having very intensive collaborations with software engineers, like for the building for producing or the architecture of the software, the knowledge graph, and also with the guys who is more an expert on developing ontologies, and the people I mentioned from the Cambridge side. So yes, there's a lot of collaboration happening here, but at the same time, if there's another chance, I would be also interested to show how I am contributing to the project and my own work on developing the ontology for the master planning and for the master planning with energy performance assessment.
Thank you very much. Neil, would you, do you want to say a few words?
I just want to, Marissa, do you want to say something first? I want to kind of, I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I wanted to thank Zhongming as well for your presentation. I actually, it's very fascinating. I wanted to actually ask Zhongming to speculate. He has shown us what this collaboration is potentially doing at this point. I'm interested in understanding how this knowledge graph, or hearing you speculate, how this knowledge graph begins to play out into the development forces that we know are the reality of our American city, our urban cities, our world cities. And so, you know, not being an urban designer, I can't give you a more specific sort of question about what you're doing right now, but I'm curious to understand a little bit more, not the outcome, because obviously, but just how you speculate this might begin to play out in the development scenario that we know is so, it really is the foundation of a lot of our capitalist urban world.
Thank you very much for the question. I think the knowledge graph comes in mainly for the data interoperability problem, that there are so many different data stored in different formats, meaning the same thing, but in different formats here and there. Especially in the US, there are a lot of open data, and this knowledge graph comes in to link all these different data flying around. So that's the whole background picture. Well, in the meantime, it lays the builds up a infrastructure for future potential artificial intelligence integrations as the data are becoming machine readable, and the machine will understand what is a building, what is a road, and what's the relations between the building and a road. And so it's more, or opens up a possibility to be more extendable, to link to more different softwares or assessment tools in addition to just link the data.
So the linking and translating are two different operations that the graph is currently doing, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's just like the Google example I showed about Tongji University. So Google quickly fetch the information you may be interested in, and as you click Tongji University, and it would just revert the information that can be useful. maybe they may be stored in different formats and different places, but they can quickly get together. So a master planner may use this tool and just clicking, show me like something, a building with all the buildings in Singapore higher than 150 meters. And I want to see the example, and quickly to show this list of buildings that's meeting your searching criteria.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe I just add something. Thank you for the presentation. I found it very difficult to understand what your particular role was. I mean, everyone before has been working as a solitary doctoral researcher, and this is part of a team, and everything was we, and so I couldn't divine what was going on. But I wanted to just kind of like raise a kind of problematic, and that is to say, you know, as soon as you kind of bring everything together, what actually happens in a kind of is that you discover the differences between different people. I remember at the AA when Brett Steele invited Peter Eisenman and Rem Koolhaas to kind of debate, and he introduced them as being very similar. They're both kind of theoretical architects, very progressive, and they write a lot, and even he showed one particular building that looked very similar. But as soon as you got them together, you realize how different they were, absolutely different. And so I'm just was going to kind of point out, you know, some of the kind of issues that start to arise. I mean, we had a discussion about meaning in the last discourse with Diego's presentation, and of course, there's different kinds of meaning. There's a whole phenomenological thing about meaningfulness kind of thing. There's the kind of semantic logic of meaning. There's also psychoanalytic thing where you can sort of talk about meaning, but you could distinguish between the Freudian concept of meaning and the Lacanian, and so on and so on and so on. You've got all these things. Now, where they come to a head is this question about semantics, which actually is a term that's used also in AI, right? And you referred to semantic meaning. Well, I've always come across when dealing with GANs semantic features, you know, and it seems to me that it's fundamentally different to what's going on, and it's very, very tricky to put them together. So I've got no clue when you say meaning, semantic meaning, what that means. But I would just say that it's kind of interesting when you do put that and you put into a side. I want to just add one final thing, and that is that Vitruvius talks about this thing. I mean, no one's picked up on this, but he said that the world is divided into what things mean and what signifies and signified, basically. And you think, really? I mean, it just sounds exactly like de Saussure, right? But it's not. But anyway, so the world, when you sort of put things together, you suddenly discover really what the differences are. Anyway, I think there's another conversation about what your actual individual research is about. But I was a little bit lost in all the we's to understand what was actually going on. But thank you anyway.
Just before, we're going to have to move on, but quickly, do you want to say maybe a final thing about your role on the team and maybe some advice for future PhDs that want to follow your path?
I think my roles on the team is to develop ontologies. Well, in another meaning, defining what the terminologies, the common languages of like find out, okay, this is floor area ratio, and this means different things in different data sets. And I link them together. And at the same time, I also define the relationship between land uses and more detailed programs. Like commercial land uses may include restaurants or shops, spas, and different things. So my work is to make all these things link together. And when in another data set, it says floor area ratio, we know that's floor area ratio, or that's the plot area ratio. So that's why, I mean, bringing the knowledge background of urban design and master planning. And at the same time, I have this energy background. So I'm also linking the different terminologies or to create common languages of energy demand, forecast, energy supply system design.
Oh, before we move on, do you have any advice? Like, what would like a young student who wanted to actually follow your path, what do they need to study? Mathematics, science, engineering? Like, what would you recommend? Or theory, history?
Well, I think I didn't expect this question to come up, but first thing come to my mind is because I like, as I mentioned, we have a lot of collaboration here. So try to, well, when making these such interdisciplinary collaborations, it's always important to understand or try to learn the language other people are talking about. Or that's very important, I think. But I think that's my path, the collaboration path. But at the same time, we'll also need to find your independent or the work that's unique to yourself in a team. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time and a wonderful presentation. I would love to speak more about your research because there were a few points that I loved, especially with the swarming and let's say the simulation of people going through the urban site is to me really fascinating. So next up, thank you again, Doctor.
Thank you.
So next up is our own Marina. So Marina, would you mind coming on board? So let me do an introduction briefly. So let's see. So Marina Rodriguez das Neves, doctorate in design, FIU currently. Her title for her presentation today is Maps Blow Up, Memories of Architectural Territories. And before we start, Marina, would you mind telling us where you are on your PhD path? And take it away.
Yes, hello, Gustavo. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for the invitation. I'm a DDS candidate in the Florida International University. I just finished my first semester, so I can see that we are all in different stages in our researches and in our careers. So my presentation, I will just share my screen. So as you can imagine, my thesis is just starting. Just a second here. Okay. Just a second, I cannot see my. Sorry. Okay, now. So this is not exactly the title of my thesis. It's just the title for this presentation. So it's special. It's just for this time, and it's Maps Blow Up, Memories of Architectural Territories. And this is a little bit the content of my thesis until now. And first, I want to say I believe that a little bit following the conversation before about the kind of model of the thesis and the kind of approach that we have. I mean, in the DDS program, which is a revolutionary program in certain ways to think education. No, it's a Doctor of Design program, and in particular, my thesis is a humanities-based model. So what I wanted to say about this is like you will see that in a way it's like a kind of a literal literature review in certain ways. So it's about bibliography, but it's about certain materials that has to be with my background as an architect. And in a way it's like a kind of collection of these different materials that what you are going to see is that the material is start to follow like the nature of the organization by itself, and it can be addressing like different aspects of the thesis, and it's like completely in movement in certain way. No, it's like really dynamic structure. So this is that you see like something like it seems to be like stuck. It's not really stuck, it's moving all the time and it's in progress. So I have like these 4 points. The first is like more to introduce some concepts, and then I started in the second part to speculate more about certain my own concepts. And then there is like some possible approaches to use this concept to build in the last part of the thesis like as a kind of new point of view theory for architectural design. So I'm just going to let this loop which is the last part that you could see in the structure, that it's about these materials that I'm using, like are more like my own data in certain ways. It's even bigger. I just organize one part of this, that is what I'm managing right now. But I'm just going to let this first of all, because I don't like this frontality of the of the Zoom situation where you have like only your face in the screen. So I hope you can't just not lost the part of the text I'm going to read. So as I said, it's more like a literature review until now, and it's focusing the use of data for architectural design. So in conducting my project, I will use the existing literature related to generate like a kind of device to try to understand the possible misunderstanding of architecture as the representation of data. So the object of study will be maps and diagrams made by architects to design and to define their practice in the architectural territory. This research will lead me to explore whether the use of data in maps and diagrams, and they have been an agent of control, a tool to differentiate practices, a way to determine authorship, or a strategy to locate architecture in a global market. So architects tend to see maps as objective representations without being aware about their consequences. On the one hand, architects are subject to wrong decisions and false beliefs if they consider that a graphic is a validation tool with an implicit idea of truth that cannot be questioned. Moreover, focusing on the representations has been problematic for architecture in different levels, such as the lack of attention in the making process and in the deep understanding of what is being represented, or in the author behind the representation, and in the biases of the representation itself. A second aspect of maps and diagrams worthy to be explored in the problem of data, which is intimately connected with maps and diagrams in architecture. Architects want to deal with the access to data and its management in architectural design, but they still don't know how. So this problem is relevant. This problem is relevant because it might entail the misconception that architecture is the mere representation of data, and that because the data is a complex, and because data is complex, architecture should represent this complexity into form. So through this research, I will seek to analyze how architects can contribute to the problem of data misuse. Consequently, I believe that rethinking the use of data to design is relevant because architecture, like other cultural disciplines, has the capacity to be a critical tool for society. So diagrams and maps were fundamental tools to define the understanding of digital aspects of design and data processing during the 90s. So I propose to go back as an anachronical action to the concept of map and diagram in architecture when they were a tool to understand, to think, and to explain processes. I propose that by analyzing a series of existing maps and diagrams from a critical perspective, based on the making processes, it will be possible to decolonize the current belief in the novelty as an agent of change. I assert that the excess of data during the design process in architecture is a new form of pollution and an unexplored problem that I want to research and make a contribution to the already deconstructed idea of maps and diagrams as a bias-free validation tool. So I will show now my other data, which is my bibliography. I have like different ways to organize this. At the same time, I have different ways to organize my rest of the material. We'll come back to this later, but I will let you hear, and I will talk about a little bit about the definitions I'm using. So to open the Pandora box, it's necessary to explore the definition of maps from different perspectives. One of the most quoted models of maps are Frederick Jameson cognitive maps. A cognitive map can refer to individuals' subjective attempt to locate themselves in a complex social milieu, or to the individual objective production of space in the multinational late capitalist world system. According to Jameson, multiple and even opposite elements are brought together under the power of some unifying or totalizing force, questioning whether cartographical practices are inherently freeing or repressive. From Jameson's perspective, a cognitive map is an allegory. There can neither be a true map nor the cognitive map be a real or perfect mimetic representation of the real. So about the aesthetic of cognitive map, Jameson used the terms of figuration not to imply mimetic copy of a pre-existent reality, but as an attempt to approach the complexity of the real that will always remain an absent cause, turning any representation inadequate. So in this way, an itinerary is turned grounded into the mapped subjects. A different model of map is the rhizome, which was defined as a mechanic multiplicity or assemblage in the principle of cartography introduced by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. This is in Thousand Plateau. The rhizome has been deeply influential in architectural theories and design. In the principle of cartography, the authors define a rhizome as a map, while a mechanical reproduction is what they identify as a trace. In Deleuze and Guattari terms, a map is not a representation. It has dynamic capacity. A map is active, rhizomatic, and oriented towards experimentation in contact with the real. It constructs the unconscious and produces it. Like a rhizome, a map is the production of unconscious. So these different definitions of maps challenge the static idea of representation, which is often reduced to data visualization. The representation of data or data visualization is closer to the idea of a copy. Different from the map, the logic of tracing is defined as a reproduction, a copy of a center order, that's in Deleuze and Guattari terms. A trace is representative and crystallized into codified complexes. It does not produce traces in the same way a map does. It only describes a de facto state. A map can be detachable provided it has not performative. Connections can be traced between different fields and in all dimensions, reversible and susceptible to constant modification. On the contrary, a trace is not performative. It always involves an alleged competence. While a map rejects any idea of retraced destiny, and it does not open pre-existing lines of flight, a trace is ready-made, coming back to the same point in a loop. Even the structures are different. Well, a map is off-centered, non-hierarchical, and is not a signifying system without an organizing memory or central automation. A trace has an arborescence structure, is hierarchical and centralized. A map is also defined solely by a circulation of state. So this is going to one of my speculative approach to my thesis, which is like, what is for me a predatory map? And there is like, it's based in the confusion between the map and the territory, which is clearly delineated during the data selection process and its representation. So to define better this problem, it is important to introduce the perspective of Gregory Bateson about information theory. Bateson refers to the idea of a map not as a territory, but as the differences that can define territories. The territory does not get into the map. What gets onto the map is the difference. There is a potential in the difference that make difference. And a difference is an abstract matter. So I'm going to quickly quote Bateson's words, which said that, let us back to the map and the territory and ask, what is in the territory that gets into the map? We know the territory does not go onto the map. That is the central point about we all agreed. Now, in the territory where uniform, nothing will get into the map except its boundaries, which are the points that, and this point ceases to be uniform against some larger matrix. What gets onto the map, in fact, is difference. but it's a difference of altitude, a difference of vegetation, a difference of population structure, difference of surface, or whatever. Differences are the things that get onto the map. A different then is an abstract matter again. So the predatory map, or what I call the predatory map, is a kind of map that wants to eat all the territory to the extreme of becoming the territory itself. To introduce this map, let's move to literature. The relation between maps and territory has been studied by Lewis Carroll in the Sylvia and Bruno Conclude. There, Lewis Carroll describes a fictional maps that had the scale of a mile to a mile, pointing out that the practical difficulties which such map and the stating, and they state that now we can use the country itself as the map. And I can tell you that it works the same as well. So the same is something that Borges mentioned in the idea that there is a territory where it has exactly the same dimension that the empire. And in this way, I'm just want to come back to some comment of Slavoj Žižek, who said that about this Carroll's map, that he said that he refers to the concept of Hegel's proper infinity. And what he says that the map, this map is different from the other part of the map of England that can include the map itself and the dimension scale, which is for Žižek an example of Hegel's bad infinity. So I don't want to go deeply in the Slavoj Žižek definition of this, because I have like some different approach to this idea of the map. But in a way, and just to close a little bit to some conclusions of my thesis until now, because I can't conclude anything yet because I'm still movement, and I can talk a little bit more about data pollution, or what I speculated as a concept myself as a data pollution. And I want to formulate like a kind of not new theory for architectural design, but a kind of new approach to include to the already existing theories. So there is that about based on this literature is what gave me like a broader understanding, and kind of what I want to build is like a kind of tool to still to seek and still non-explored niches that can appear. No, like some of the maps that we are seeing here, particularly the Alejandro Sara polo map there, which is like a seeker niche. So to conclude, I might define that even when in the architecture the misuse of data has been enunciated, for example, Reiser and Memoto, Atlas of Novel Tectonic talk about this, as the confusion between the map and the territory, it has not been deeply defined as a problem of data excess in the architecture practice. Consequently, I assert that the idea of data pollution during the design process in architecture is something unexplored that I really want to research deeply, and to try to make this contribution that I talked before to the already then constructed idea of maps and diagrams as bias-free validations tool. So maps and diagrams, different from traces, are more than graphic representations. They are images of thought to be criticized and virtualized dynamically, to be then actualized in futures theory for architectural design. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina, for your presentation today. I really appreciate I think just to start off a little bit, I appreciated the different way that you presented. I also appreciated how you are thinking about architecture and the terms that you're bringing to bear, especially with mapping, the idea of the diagram, data. I guess just to get started, does any, Marisabel, do you want to start off, or Philip, do you want to start, or Neil, since you're on?
Marisabel, do you want to say something? I can say something, but.
Go ahead, Neil.
No, I put a comment in the chat there about how the subtitles are getting confused here, and Slavoj Žižek's name came out as slavery seasick. I mean, it's just incredible. But anyway, so I don't know whether your presentation, Marina, which was beautiful, of course, was understood. But one thing I wanted to pick up on, and there's so much to talk about, I don't want to get into it. I think Alejandro Zaropolo is an interesting character in many ways. The book that he produces, Phylogenesis, I was teaching at the AA at the time when it came out, or at least I knew people who had been working at FOA and kind of and knew it. And he kind of actually what happened was they said no, this is a post factum. It was done afterwards, trying to understand what they were doing. I mean, it wasn't. It was presented as though it was the ideas that were feeding into what they were into their logic, but actually, it was retrospectively an analysis of what was going on. And we get this in kind of in architecture. I mean, several times. I mean, I remember that James Stirling would produce a sketch afterwards to explain what had generated the building. And it was always a kind of really interesting kind of play of one against the other. And this whole attempt to that started with, I guess, Jenks in particular, kind of to try and map out this kind of these genealogies in some ways. It was kind of curious. Clearly it has to fail, in some ways. But I was struck by why Alejandro Zaropolo tries to do another version of it, which is kind of somehow a circular version. I can remember seeing an image of this at Tongji. He'd obviously given a lecture there before I'd been there and so on. And I was just kind of totally confused. Why would you want to do that? I mean, given the fact that actually the kind of the connectivities that are happening these days are so multiple and diverse, and you can't even imagine them in 3 dimension anyway. But, I'm just struck by the fact that there are all these different kind of communities that happen. I mean, I happen to I'd be part of a WeChat community, and I'm part of a kind of WhatsApp community, but other people are on Facebook and Instagram and God knows what else. And this is this kind of interaction that's happening now, and there's this kind of meta level happening. So to be able to try and put it on a singular map, that is kind of static, that is 2D, is inevitably going to be a failure. But I think to my mind, the more interesting thing is, why does anyone want to try and do that? Is it a kind of, for them, an attempt to try and situate themselves as a kind of form of cognitive map in that Frederick Jameson talks about? It's a curious endeavor. I don't know what you want to comment on that, Marina.
Yeah, I believe that we should ask Alejandro specifically about this. But anyway, what I believe, or at least what I understand about the political compass, is like this synchronical cut. So it's just to try to take like an state the moment, no? And the difference with the Charles-Jean's diagram is that the Charles-Jean's diagrams is evolutionary, but it's like this timeline, no? So that's what, like, the difference to see like something like this continuum line, and then just to cut one of the edges and to see what's going on there, and try to understand that. I believe that in a way, and I'm not going to speak in the name of Alejandro, of course, but what I like about this is like the idea of architects talking about architecture. This is something that for me is really important, and this is something I'm interested in as well. I define myself as an architect, and I like this idea that we can think our discipline and to try to understand what's going on. And in a way, what you said about this idea of the swarm, or the swarm intelligence, I think that it's in a way related in certain way, because you have like some bubbles that are mixed, that there are like some gray areas in between. And I believe that's an important concept as well. And sometimes it's necessary, to stop a little bit and to reflect about what's going on. And it's like a little, I believe it's related with the question that I made, what you explained about swarm intelligence. And I said, like, where do you locate yourself? In a way, are you part of the swarm, or you are like out of the swarm, looking how the swarm is working, no? And how are these choreographies? But in our discipline, it's like, how are these relations? Where you can locate the different branches of architecture, for example, or the different practices of architecture, and where you can see that something emerge from it as well. No, I believe that at least is something I'm really interested to understand, as well as even what we are doing, in the not only in architecture, in digital future as well.
Yeah. Marina, thank you very much for your comments. Maricel, do you want to come in? And
Yes.
Philip just came on the camera too. So Marisabel.
If I may, so Marina, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm always fascinated by maps. So when I started to see what your subject was all about, I was extremely excited. And it's very interesting because as you were talking about your thoughts about the maps and diagrams and mapping, I was reminded of a question that you actually posed, and I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been during one of the presentations. It was during one of the presentations this week, and it had to do with the presentation that I'm forgetting now. The professor at Yale. Anna Maria presented, and you actually talked about this idea of the acupuncture, and and you made this great sort of visual analogy where you said this acupuncture almost feels like it's almost like one of those depth cores that you send into the terrain, and it brings up all this information in this one compressed spot. And at that moment, that sort of, it kind of made sense to me that you kind of thought that, because this is essentially what these maps are in many respects. And I thought that was very interesting. So I just wanted to kind of remind you of your question, because it was very kind of linked to me with what you are showing today. But one question I actually did have for you about this, and it's one of that is always, what are we doing when we're mapping? If we're taking this idea of data, something that's already preconceived, and then trying to organize it, or do architects actually materialize this data? And that's the question for me to you. Is that process of mapping actually a way of gelling these points, of kind of defining these depth cores that then we begin to put in relation with each other? And I don't know if that's really the subject of what you really, where you want to go with your work, but that in fact that really is talking about what we do as architects. Do you have comments to that?
Yeah, I have comments about both aspects. First of all, nice to meet you finally, because I was following your question, and now I can talk with you. And yes, about the idea of the acupuncture, for example, I was thinking about the previous publication in El Croquis of Alejandro Sarapolo, which is a world full of holes. And it's like the niche seeker, no? It's like to try to find these niches, the practice, no?
Right.
And then we can start build from there. But of course, it's like and then I don't know if it's exactly acupuncture. It's like how you can understand, like in all these layers. If you understand, like in the layer logic that we talk with Wonderland as well, you can see like all these like in a way like kind of connections, no? But it could be like holes as well. Yeah. Intensities. Yes, of course. Of course. Yes. And then about the idea of what we architects do, I believe that that's something that we are really good on, and to organize. No, in a way we organize matter in the space, and this is our materials as well. No, as designer we have like this idea of them. All these projects that we have, all the architecture we make, not only the material aspect of architecture, but also all the projections that we have about architecture. This is material as well. This is our matter. And we organize that. And I believe that we are good doing that, to organize the things and to try to find these links and to try to find the holes and to organize what we are seeing. And we are mapping all the time as architects. So I define this is what is my practice about, and I'm always working in this kind of dense and polluted, polluted environment, full of data and projects and theories and things that, and you put all the things together, and you create like, today Neil talked about the narratives. I don't know exactly if they are narratives, but in a way you are created like these bridges between things, and also we are trying to locate these niches as well. So I believe that that is what all my thesis is about, but it's still super, it's just starting. So I have all the, I'm a collector, like in a way, so I have all this material right now, and it's a little bit messy, and yeah.
And that's okay too, but I think that one thing that one final point is that this idea of data pollution is interesting in and of itself. You know, we think about this noise, and I'm not sure that that is necessarily a pejorative thing. And the other thing is, so when you say data pollution, I'm immediately saying, okay, this is pejorative, but is it truly pejorative? And then the other thing really is define for me what data is. I think like the word meaning, we could all have a very different idea about what data really truly is for an architect at this point. So maybe that is also part of your thesis. Anyway, I enjoy very much hearing about this.
So before we move on, Philip, Philip has been waiting patiently. So Philip, do you want to say something?
Sorry, Philip.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, Mariana put forward, because in Digital Future 2016, we have a special topic on the diagrammatic thinking of the digital fabrication. I published a book several years ago, and I invite Anthony Picon coming to make keynote, and I present my book to him, and actually got some very interesting feedback. I think Marina's thinking is really important from a theorist perspective as a researcher. And a diagram or map is a kind of abstract machine which can give a different overview on our discipline in architecture. But I think because my name is on the Alejandro's map, I asked him 3 years ago. I asked him why you put me on the diagrammatic in these zones, because I feel not absolutely not right to put my name there in that position. It's a little bit tricky, but I think it's new understanding for people on the very difficult understanding word. So what is abstract machine behind this complicated word? So that's the most important things for researchers. If you can put forward special category or special perspective, that is a theoretical part of your research. It's not the map itself, not the diagram itself, but how you want to categorize the people or the buildings or the styles or different kind of technologies in different ways. So I think that is the key point of your research. And how would you like to see the world from your perspective? So I think that is maybe the very abstract machine you need to make research, and how to theorize this kind of abstract machine for you. Because Michael Foucault actually in his book mentioned panopticon, that is the prison, how to represent a certain kind of power, how to the power between the prisoner and the guard. So I think it's a kind of abstract machine to present the world. And the diagram of map is a two-dimensional thing, and some people criticize on that, but I think it's interestingly to review a very complete world in a very simple way. So this is a simplified process that need understanding on the technology. For example, in my book, the diagrammatic thinking on digital fabrication, I think, which is extremely important, because although everything is nonlinear right now in the working flow, and we're facing different problems, but actually, if you want to collaborate with the machine, you need to simplify the abstract, the complicated scenarios into certain process. So that's the simplified process need to update version by version, and authorship of this kind of process is really critical for research. And maybe that's interesting present by a diagrammatic way. So I think that's maybe some very solid perspective on the category or the working flow, a special view, the special vision from your own research, the individual research. So I think as a general topic, mapping is always there, and diagrammatic research is always there. From a theoretical perspective, that is going on generation by generation. Although in the information age, the information is like the big data is booming. but at the same time, we want to know the layers, like Benjamin Batten mentioned. He mentioned about the terraforming planet. How to terraform the planet is by different layers to categorize information, to have certain perspective to review the complicated world in a very simple way. So I strongly support your research, but I think that should base on a very theoretical or philosophical skills to see things essentially and from the ontological way. So I think that's really important. I'm looking forward to see your research and papers in the near future.
I just wanted to invite, and Neil, did you have any final thoughts, or anyone else about Marina? Because we're close to the hour to finish, but I just want to make sure that we have final thoughts. Marina, do you have any last words that you want to leave?
Yes, I can use part of my last word to say something of Philip. I really appreciate your comment, because one thing I was that was part of my research is something that it's the Foucault of Deleuze, not the real Foucault, not the Foucault of Deleuze. And he said, like, in one moment, what Foucault changed from the conception of the historian to the cartographer. And that's what I'm trying to do. My master degree is about history and culture, and now I would like to really go to that direction. I don't know exactly what is the model, and I believe that that's what I'm trying to looking for in terms of like to try to think about the theory of this, and I want to think about what is the model of this, and about the thing that you said about the conception of diagram for Foucault. Is like the panopticon is a diagram. It's not exactly the formalization of the building that we know. That so we as architects, we tend to formalize like certain things. No, and we think like Neil said in the field lecture, like the fold for Peter Eisman is like one fold, not with certain angles, but for Greg Ling is different. For Cash, no, for Bernard Cash. So and then you could see that there is like what we are trying to or what we should try to understand better is like what is behind the form, and what is hidden there. And because there is also, like, as you said, as you use this is part of the authorship as well, no, that how everybody understands the fold, for example. And but yes, I completely agree about your comments, and I will try to follow your comments as well as Marisabel and Neil and Gustavo comments as well. So thank you very much.
So I welcome Neil and Philip to kind of end this session, and also maybe some thoughts on the other presentations.
Well, maybe I could just sort of say that, I mean, final word. I mean, I think what was behind what Marina was saying, there's nothing's final. Everything is in kind of in a process of flow. We had a discussion this last week, and I forget whether it was Erin Manning or Ana Maria Duran Callisto, but the idea that we have to sort of approach architecture as a verb rather than as a noun, you know. And I think that what we got here, I think, was a kind of some process of thinking in your work, Marina, that has not been and it remains alive and dynamic and so on. I just wanted to say that I think that, I mean, I really enjoyed all the presentations today. I think they were really fantastic, and it was a great group of individuals. But I've left even more convinced of when we speculated about the possibility of putting this platform together. I mean, it came out of the DDES that Marina's on, which is we found we could have these discussions and bring together world experts in the same space, the same Zoom space, and have the kind of feedback, intense feedback that we wouldn't get otherwise. And this is the next step on, and in some ways, which is fantastic. And I think it's really, hopefully this is just the beginning of something in terms of how we might rethink the problem in some ways of doctoral research, which is to do with the isolation, the kind of comments that Diego was talking about, and how we can kind of form a kind of a community where there's a continual feedback of information to support one another, because like this is really, really, really important. And I think a lot of people just have got no clue. They're just embarking on a doctorate. There are so few models out there, especially in architecture, and so few people have actually taught doctoral students that it's a very isolated thing. And I think to collectively bring together these experiences will help everyone. So, I think it's actually, I'm hoping this is going to be a kind of game changer in doctoral research, and we can continue this as an ongoing debate, because I think this is really almost where this platform is most useful. But let me hand over to Philip.
I think it's a great experience. I enjoyed the whole process. Thanks a lot to all the presenters. I think it's really important. I totally agree on Neil's comments. I think it's really important especially for the PhD candidates or postdoctoral researchers. Sometimes a different team isolate their research, and before they publish the papers, they don't want to introduce to the others. But I think my suggestion is something in between. I think it's important to keep you individually isolated in a certain way, because you need to make yourself special. I think that is important, but at the same time, the collaborative communication is really important for the people to understand the world is different and understand the technology is booming right now, and how to set up new collaborative process to make something more interesting. So that is what we're doing. I think we have different teams in different universities. We have different programs in different PhD programs in different universities. But at the same time, Digital Futures Consortium, PhD Consortium produced, it's more like a TED in architecture, of digital in architecture, TED. It's a TED talk. We would like to invite different professors and PhD candidates in the future to present their research. Maybe that is not the most secret part, but I think the way how to make the presentation is very important. We can see some of you doing really good work. You need a very big vision or very special vision that attract people. At the same time, you need some both theoretical and technology skills to theorize your vision is right. So I think it's a way, just like in 15 or in 20 minutes, how to present a vision very well. So that's a very important skill for the future generation, especially if we will participate different conference. It also give us just like sometimes 15, 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour. Sometimes I have 1 hour lecture, but that's all different. It's all different. So that's a very important skills, how to present your understanding, your research, and your vision in a very short time, firstly. And second, I think we produce a platform that's really important to exchange. It's more like a category of your research, or brief understanding, or brief vision of research. Maybe that's not the most secret part in SCI paper or the conference paper, because like Zhongming, his paper in Cadre is more technology than today. Maybe today he make a brief introduction of his team, but in the Cadre paper presentation, he introduced very detailed from a technology perspective. So I think the culture is different here. It's more like we try to understand what's your research background and your research vision and your research framework. I think that is most important to encourage the new generation, influence the new generation, younger people, like grad students or undergrad students, and influence their future, or influence some practitioner to introduce some new technology into their practice. So this is a kind of culture I agree. Gustavo, thanks a lot. I think you're doing a really good job, and also all the organizers here are the PhD candidates, a young generation. I really appreciate what you're doing here. At the same time, last thing I want to highlight is I think it's quite different continent to set up their PhD program, and some interesting university, they're really isolated, but they're good enough to be isolated. And a lot of university like more theoretical or more general on some possibility for the future career. It's more like free ways, very not very great pressure, just write a thesis paper. But some schools really in a technology way, they need some scientific experiments and doing some scientific research. They're really seriously for the more like engineer style research process. But I appreciate Neil name it category in 3 kinds of PhD program right now: theoretical, design in PhD, in doctor, and also we have some like more scientific papers. I think that's the world. The world is good to be different to each other, and most importantly, I appreciate sometimes the theoretical research is really very good to talk about the vision. Sometimes the next 10 years or 20 years is just influenced by some concept. So someone need to do that work to give us a new understanding what's the potential future, what's the evolution, the trend going on. And maybe the big army is slow, but the avant-garde is already on the way. So I think we need someone to doing this kind of theoretical work. At the same time, if we want to go deep as a PhD, most of universities like Archimangus, Philip Rock, and including Roland Snook and Mike Shea, we have a loop of professors in universities. We're doing a lot of scientific experimental evidence-based research process. That's extremely important because we need to verify, we need to do some very detailed technology, and maybe sometimes the computational scripts and some formulas are important, but because that is something really pushing the big army moving. So I think I appreciate both. And at the same time, some PhD in design is booming out globally, including in Italy, and in Europe, and in Australia, in China as well. I think that will be extremely important to give some talent designers some new possibility to theorize their their design skills or design practice, and that gives them a special opportunity to teach in the university in the future. So I also appreciate we can give them some guidelines, not only on the theoretical perspective, but also maybe technical perspective, give them some support. This platform will be meaningful in the future to set up this kind of global difference and global influence to all the researchers. And I think that's maybe why we set up this platform, why I appreciate you and me, I think, and also the big team. We spend a lot of time, but I don't think that's a waste of time. It's very helpful to give a new culture to the discipline. So that's what I want to say. Thank you. Neil, would you like to?
Well, just a final comment, because there's a question in the chat by a guy called MT Han. My question to PhD candidates Neil, Gustavo, Mirabel: how did you select the university to do your PhD? I mean, this is a big topic, and I think Philip just touched on it there. I think there are many different modalities, different models of doctorates that are out there, and the one that we pursued at Tongji, and we're doing it in FIU, is one where you can do it while you're actually in post as an academic, which is a different model entirely to the one where you have a kind of laboratory or something and you're sitting there for 5 years or so. So there are lots of different ones. What I would say is that, you know, all I would say to the person who asked the question is that if you're going to do research, that's the first bit of research you must do to find out where the best places to go is, and don't fall for the hype. Everyone will tell you that they are the best university in the world. Well, they can't be, right? You can't all be the best. So do your research and go and find out what it is. And it is, I think it's an evolving area, and it's actually something that really needs itself some research, because, you know, we're now discovering that academics have to have doctorates for different reasons, and we're having to adjust to this world. You know, we as architects spend so much time just training to be an architect, while other people have already got their doctorates and things. We have to find a way to make that happen. So there are many inventive kind of strategies that are emerging right now, and it's an evolving field. So anyway, we better wrap this up because we've got another one tomorrow, or later today if you're in China. Can I just thank Gustavo for hosting the session today, and thank those who were that were presenting. They were wonderful presentations, and thank Philip and Marissa Bell for their comments. really insightful as ever. But above all, I want to thank the people you can't even see, you haven't seen, who are behind the scenes here, who are making this happen. And this is an incredible act of generosity, people volunteering their time to improve the world. And I think that's an astonishingly noble act of generosity. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, especially the team behind things. Just to say that we have another session, which is going to be, maybe Philip, it's going to be for you, it's going to be
10 o'clock in the evening. For you, it's
tonight.
early morning. Yeah, tonight.
Yes, right. Okay, good.
Thank
So
you.
we look forward to that. And after that, also, there's a series which Philip is curating, which is of performance-based design, which we've got some fantastic contributors, many of them actually leading very important doctoral spaces themselves. Philippe Bloch, Akim Menges, and Meta Thompson to begin with. There's a fantastic lineup. So
I just wanted to say thank you, Neil. Thank you, Philip, for your kind and wonderful thoughts. I think it's very important for us to move forward as a community. So I really appreciate you both creating this platform and establishing a forum for discussion. I want to thank Marisabel, of course, for her generosity of time, and everyone who presented today. Sara, who did it at 3 in the morning, and now it's 5 in the morning. Diego, Marina, and Dr. Xi. I want to speak with him particularly because I'm so excited about his work and all of your work. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.